Hi friends, today we're going to be moving on to the fringe stitch or turkey work, and we're going to be working on our trees. We will be using 6-strand embroidery floss for this in 2 different colors, 3052 and 937. But you can use any colors you want. You can use any thread types you want. These are just the ones that I've chosen because I think it gives a really nice look to the trees on the pattern. We'll also be using a chenille 22 needle, but you can use any needle that works for you. It doesn't really matter. Let's get stitchy with it, I guess. I'm going to be working on the left tree today. So when you're starting to do this French stitch, I didn't like how part of the tree was kind of hanging up over the shoulder. So what I did was start your French stitch here and go over. And then what I did was I kind of use a satin stitch to kind of fill in this area. So that way it looks full. It looks like the tree, but it's not going to be overlapping onto the shoulder because you want to make sure that this tree looks like it's in the distance farther away from her on the cliff. You also just keep the fringe the way that it is, but I like to kind of trim this a little bit and then do that satin stitch to kind of fill that in. We're going to be taking our hoop and we're going to be flipping it upside down. We do the French stitch. We're wanting to make sure that our fringe lays this way. If we do the French stitch this way, it will lay this way. And obviously that doesn't look like a tree. You're going to do your French stitch across this line here for each different layer of each tree. We've already kind of started this one, so I'm going to kind of start this one to show you the process. Now, once again, over here, it can kind of overlap on the hair in the tree. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to fill this in with that satin stitch. That way it has that full look, but it won't be going over the shoulder or ruining the perspective that we have on this pattern. All right, we've got the satin stitch done. Let's move on to our first French stitch. To start out, you're going to start going into the fabric, not coming out from underneath. And what you're going to do is leave a little tail. Now this tail needs to be at least a little bit longer to where you're wanting it to hit. So here, we wanted our tails to hit almost exactly there, but because we want to make sure that we have some extra thread as buffer, I like to go a little bit longer than that with my thread, so that way no matter what, I can always slowly trim it to make sure I get the right length. I'm going to come up right next to that tail, and you're going to do something called a locking stitch over it. Okay, and that's going to lock that thread in place. And that is how you're going to start your French stitch. You're going to come up right next to that tail, okay? And this is when you're going to start making loops. Now you want your loops to be the same length all the way across. Now, granted, it doesn't really matter because you will be trimming them, but it's good force of habit to make them all the same length. So create your little loop with your finger, and then you're going to go into the fabric right next, not in the same hole, but right next to it. Making sure not to pull too tight where that loop gets pulled all the way through, okay? Hold it down with your thumb. You're going to come up at the end of your previous locking stitch. So you have your locking stitch. You're going to come up through the end of that. Then you're going to use this locking stitch to go over this part of your loop. Continuing on, you will come up between these 2 locking stitches here, okay? That's how you start your next one. So we already started one, we did the second one, now to do the third one, you're gonna come up here between these 2. Loop. And you're gonna go back into the fabric. Now, the shorter your locking stitches, the more full your tree is going to look. So you don't wanna go from like here to here. You wanna make sure you keep them, especially going around the curves, you wanna keep those short. And then you just keep going down your pattern. Once you've filled a complete row of stitches, you're going to have to then turn it into fringe. And to do that, you're going to want to take your scissors and clip underneath each loop. Run your fingers across the thread to kind of separate those strands to give it that more full look. Now with our first layer, we wanted to make sure that we didn't have any thread going over our flower, which I think we have a few little strands here. Trim it up a little bit. And with this layer, we're definitely going to want to make sure that we cover up the edge of the second one. We don't make it too long. So you make it too long, it's going to cover that bottom layer. So I'm making it extra long. Gives you that kind of safety net so you can mess around with the links before anything gets set in stone. Kind of start off with a simple trim. kind of like cutting hair. Here. Now, you don't have to worry about it being too perfect. A lot of these are not cut exactly the same, and that's okay. Nothing in nature is perfect. And neither should your embroidery be. Basically, the concept of what you're wanting to do, making sure that you trim them so that way each different section just barely covers the next one with the end of the fringe. That is how you do the fringe stitch to give yourself some really nice looking trees for your pattern. Go ahead and fill in at least your left tree, so that way we can practice the oyster stitch to get ourselves some nice little pine cones put in there. If you haven't gotten yourself the pattern yet, you haven't gotten your supplies, head on over to DMC. You can get all of that now. Just make sure to use my promo code GULAXDMC at checkout. That way you can get 15% off of your purchase, and the pattern will always be free. All of these videos will also be available on my Instagram as well as on the DMC website and my website for many years to come. So don't worry if you are just now getting started or just now getting introduced. All of the resources will still be there, so that way you can continue getting stitchy, creating this pattern, or just working with those stitches in general in the future. Cool. All right, guys, I'll see you guys tomorrow. Looking forward to seeing all your finished trees.